So how do you go to a networking event and then present your full self?
We are in transitions more than ever. And a lot of people, especially women, struggle with networking. The biggest mistake I think people make on networking is not... Welcome to Raw with Uma, and I'm Uma, your host and architect of Raw Leadership, here to bring you unfiltered, unrehearsed, unscripted conversations with women about what really goes on in navigating life and work. Are you ready? Let's get raw. So for every show, I will not know who the guests are and what their questions will be until we meet for the first time in front of the camera. I'm then joined by a co-host I've invited to offer an alternative view to the conversation. So my guest today is Audrey. Welcome, Audrey.
Hi, Uma. Thanks for the welcome.
And we've just found out, well, I just found out that you are my guest today.
Yes.
Literally minutes ago. And I don't know what you're going to ask me. I actually only know one word. It's networking.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me, what's on your mind?
So I think this is something that all of us face when we come to a networking event. Something that I've always wondered and curious about. You're having a very good conversation with someone, but then you look around the room, there's someone else that you want to engage, and perhaps that's the person that you came to this networking event for. How do you gracefully exit the conversation so that you can move on to the next one?
So how do you usually do it?
For me, usually I'll pretend that I see someone that I know, and I'll be like, oh, I will get over there.
It's like, oh, I see someone.
Yeah.
I usually try and end every conversation with something. So I would say something like, it was great to meet you, person's name, love to stay in touch. I mean, if you found the conversation interesting and you want to stay in touch, I'm going to meet more people here. And then exit gracefully. But I totally know what you mean. I'm an introvert. Are you, so I find it really hard at networking. And then I usually cling myself to the first person I meet at an event.
Yeah, that's the same for me as well. I'm an introvert. And sometimes when I get into a conversation with someone, really enjoyed the conversation, learned a lot from that person. But at the same time, I think all of us come to a networking event to network, to meet, to expand our circle and to learn from different folks. So then sometimes I do wonder whether I should have a more deliberate strategy in moving through different people at an event.
Yeah, I typically try to think of just 3 connections that I'd like to make, and sometimes I don't know who it's going to be. Sometimes I know. Like one of the best tips I've ever heard, if you're going to an event and you want to be memorable to a speaker, if you're going there for that speaker, is to send a note before on LinkedIn to say, I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow and hearing you speak. And then at the event, you go up to them after they speak. My name is, and I sent you a message yesterday, looking forward to meeting you. I found this one thing that was interesting in your talk. And then after, to send a follow-up message, maybe the next day, it was great to meet you. And then you definitely will remain memorable to that person. Now, that's in a scenario where you are going to a conference or an event, and you are going there because of a speaker. So that's one that I thought was super helpful that I learned from a friend.
Thanks for sharing that. I will try to use that at the next networking event.
Yeah.
I guess related to that question, how do you extract the best story from someone? I think all of us, when we go to a networking event, we probably come prepped with a few questions for the 1 or 2 individuals that we're there for. But how do you make sure that when we are asking questions, we inspire them to share their most authentic and useful stories for us?
I like to ask questions like, what's filling up your calendar this week? To get an insight into what might be the life of this person. For example, I was riding here with my nephew, who's 20, and he's about to go into medical school. And he has figured out, and apparently they use Reddit, he has figured out 20 other people who are starting the same course as him, and he's been networking with them, right? So he's seeked them out. Apparently they're all on Telegram and WhatsApp now. And he's already networked so that he's building his tribe before he gets there in February. So I think first you got to do what's comfortable for you. But I like to ask, what did your week look like? What filled up your calendar?
That's nice. Thanks for sharing that. I guess something that I've always wondered about as well is, all of us come to a networking event, and then most of the time we say, hi, I'm XXX, I'm from this organization. But at the same time, and nowadays, a lot of us take on different identities. We are not just who we are at work. We're not just that title that we are at work. So how do you go to a networking event and then present your full self to whoever that you want to speak to and network with?
That's a tough one. I remember the first time I was stumped because I had just signed my redundancy, and it was a year ago. And then I went to this big event, and suddenly there was a bunch of people around a circle, and people went around saying name and title, which is your job title. So then it came to me, and as it was going around, I was like, oh, well, I can't really say I'm the vice president of VMware anymore. So I was like, what am I going to say? And I think I mumbled something. I think I said something like, well, I'm a community builder. I'm the founder of Lead in Singapore. But if I didn't have that, what would I have said, right? And I think this is such an important topic because we are in transitions more than ever.
Yeah.
So many of us. And I'm a multi-hyphenate. I don't just do one thing. And so if you don't have your job, how do you introduce yourself? And I think one of the biggest questions that I've been working on the last few years is, who am I if I'm not the daughter, the wife, the sister, the niece, insert your current identity. How might you describe yourself?
Yeah.
So far, and it's, by the way, taken me 3 years, I am describing myself as a connector. I usually can connect people pretty quickly, 1 degree of separation. I describe myself as a creator. That's a new identity because I started enjoying writing very much this year and producing content like this. I'm a community builder because of what I do for Lean In. And I'm an altruist. I care about social impact. So I'm still figuring out if that's me. It might change next year. But this introduction, I think, is such an important question. So if I were to ask you, Audrey, then. So Audrey, nice to meet you. What would you say?
Well, honestly, I'm quite stumped when you ask me that question as well. Because like you, I also do multiple things. I'm a civil servant, but outside of work, I'm in a few communities. One about building women and leadership capabilities, and the other about tech for good. So when I'm asked that at networking events, or when I go up to someone, I don't really know what to say. Sometimes when I go to networking events, before that they require that you fill up your name and your organization. But then when I go there and then I take that name tag, I feel very stifled because that's not all who I am. I'm more than that. So yeah, I'm still figuring that out, still trying to find that phrase or that few lines that would describe myself.
Yeah. I think it's a hard one. Sometimes I just say, what do I spend my time doing? Here's what I care about. Here's what I'm passionate about, instead of a job title. So that could be other options. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. And a lot of people, especially women, struggle with networking because it's another form of work.
Yeah.
Right? So we say, like, for women, there's the housework, there's beauty work, there's work, then there's network. And so a lot of women, especially those who have responsibilities at home, aren't usually able to get time to go out to network as well. But we all know, in order to progress in anything that you are doing, you do need a network.
Yes.
And it's not the act of networking, it's the network that gets to work for you when you need it. And a lot of times we are networking when we need it, not before we need it. And that's the biggest mistake that people make.
I wanted to have another question related to that. Well, I'm not a mom yet, but when it comes to, we talked about identities. When someone transits from a single person, from singlehood to a mother, how would you advise that they carve out time as well as an identity to go for networking events? Because oftentimes I find that my colleagues around me, when they become a mother, that's their main identity. And it's a really, really busy job. But then they sometimes do forget that networking is also incredibly important.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I'm a dog mom, firstly, but I'm a mom in many other ways. So I can't really comment as a lived experience, but I can speak for friends who are mothers. I think, firstly, a mother is such a beautiful identity to have. So just embracing that and understanding that it's one that comes with a huge amount of responsibility, etc. I mean, this is where part of the movement to try and get to gender diversity is that housework is not today paid work, right? And it's not on the same level as work that we deliver at work. And so it's not recognized in the same way. And the friends that I have great support at home, that it's truly a 50-50, in caring for the child or the children that they have. So it's truly a shared responsibility, depending on the economics contribution as well. So I think it's really just figuring out what works for you. If you have to go home and switch off at 4 p.m., hopefully you've had that conversation with your boss and you're going home early for whatever reasons. But you can network for breakfast, for lunch. You can network in different ways over a Zoom call, for example. So I think it's figuring out what works best for you. And the biggest mistake I think people make on networking is not keeping in touch with the people that you've had a positive working experience with. And a lot of times, I was just with a friend recently who's an executive, and he has been keeping in touch with this person for 8 years, off and on, but never heard back. And then very recently, she wanted something, and then she sent a text, and it's on WhatsApp, so you can see the history of him reaching out with no response. And then suddenly she needs something from him, and she's reaching out. Now, obviously, he's a really lovely person, so he's not going to turn her down, but you can imagine what it feels like to be asked only when you are needed for something.
Yeah, it's not a nice feeling to have at all.
No.
I wanted to come to that about keeping in touch with people we've met at networking events. Do you have any tips on how to do that on the long term? Because sometimes you meet someone at an event, let's say you have a common topic, let's say it's about female empowerment. And then that's a cause that you really are passionate about in that season of life. Let's say a new work assignment comes along, and then your focus is entirely pushed to, this other thing. It's quite a lot of stamina required, I think, to keep up with someone. Tips I've heard before included having a newsletter to a mailing list, and then she just sends updates of what she's been doing, projects that she's done, which I thought was quite creative. But I was also wondering if people would be interested in that at all.
Look, I think people are seeking human connections, especially after the pandemic. So I think if this is a connection that you believe there is value exchange in some shape or form, whether now or in the future, I think going the extra mile in the beginning and identifying this is a person of interest that I do want to stay in touch with, find a reason to do something together with that person. And, you're going to meet my co-host shortly. He was introduced to me by another person. And then I had coffee with him, and I really enjoyed the conversation. So I found a reason to stay in touch by inviting him to this show. Now, not everybody has a show to invite people to, but I'm just saying, find a reason to do something together so that I believe 6-9 months from now, if I were to reach out to my co-host, of course he's going to remember me because we did something together and we experienced something together. So you cannot do this for everyone you meet. So you've got to choose based on what is important to you, So if what are you pursuing right now? What are your passions?
Well, currently I'm really interested in the tech for good space.
Tech for good, okay.
Yeah. I love how it combines my interest in social impact with tech. And I'm very curious to see if tech can really help amplify social good, if it could help nonprofit organizations amplify their impact.
Okay, so who are the people that you need to meet, want to meet, that would be valuable to this passion?
I would think people in tech careers, as well as people who are currently working in nonprofit organizations, to find out, what are limitations that they face? Have they tried any innovative ways to streamline their processes, such as volunteer management? Have they tried to use tech to solve some of the problems that they have?
Okay, and how are you doing so far on building that network?
Currently, I am part of a Tech for Good community, which is quite large, and I've gotten so many introductions to really interesting people through that community. So that's great, but I would think that the difficulty comes in keeping up that connection because that community doesn't have a lot of community events. We have one annual conference a year, and then some ad hoc ones in between. So then, when you talk about find something to do together, that's where I find difficulty in.
Yeah, but it can also be inviting a person to go to an event with you.
Yeah.
If you have a shared interest, you probably like the same events.
That's true. Yeah, I can try that.
Yeah.
We actually have the annual conference is coming up on Saturday, so then I'll use that chance to reconnect with some of the past community members that I've met and maybe go to more events like that together.
Yeah, that's one way to do it. Yeah.
Speaking of networking, I wonder when you were first starting out in your career, what were the things that you prioritized most at a networking event?
Selfishly, I prioritize all the high-ranking executives.
Okay.
I just figured out who they were. I wanted to hang around them, and I had to figure out how to hang around them.
Okay.
I was motivated by money early in my career for good reasons, right? I grew up without it, and I wanted to make sure I built a life for myself that I never had to worry about it. And if I was going to rise faster than anybody else, then I needed to hang around people who were already there. So I looked for those people, like actively, every day, every meeting, every interaction, every hallway, every event, and I would find a way to get to them through other people, etc. And look, as an introvert, I struggled with speaking up. To even say something, I'd be like, why would anybody want to spend 5 minutes with me? Or what do I say in this meeting? And the hack that I used was this word, actually. So I would just find myself and just force myself to say the word, actually, and then I'd have to say something, right? So I'd interrupt myself. It's like an intervention to myself. So in a meeting of, very important people, and I was somehow invited to that meeting, I'd be like, I need them to know I am here, right? I need to be visible. So I need to speak up. right? So sweaty palms, everything. So I'd say actually, and then I have to think about something to say, right? I mean, actually, like they don't really remember what you say after. But then I said something to just force myself. And I think this is the biggest thing with like confidence is that people think that you have to wait for confidence before you do something, but actually you got to do something to get the confidence.
Yeah. I'm just curious, as a young careerist, how do you get the high-level execs interested in you?
I think they're always interested in talent, and you're going to hear this from my co-host, who's very focused on this. I think they're always curious to meet anyone. I think you don't get to that level without understanding that the backbone of the company is talent. And so they're always looking for opportunities to go beyond the PowerPoints and beyond the data to speak to real people. It's also part of the job. You know, it comes with the job. And I mean, I enjoyed it very much as a senior executive, so I can only imagine that when I was somebody junior, I was an engineer, and then I did my first sales job in IBM, that they were more than willing to give their time. You know, all these things that we say in our heads, like, oh, I shouldn't ask them for my time, I'm going to waste their time, I'm not worth their time, they're too busy. These are all narratives that we say in our heads, which is not true. I think there's a way to get time with people that are busy or holding high positions. And the way is to be specific, is to say, I'd love 15 minutes of your time. I noticed you said this in the town hall, really intrigued to double click on it. Or I just wanted to introduce myself, I'm new to the company, here's what I do. So I think like being specific versus like, sometimes on LinkedIn we get messages like, hi, it's great to connect, full stop. And then you go, why? What would you like? So a lot of times when people ask for my time, I ask, how would you like to use the time? And then when I get, well, I just like to catch up. For me, it's, you know, really tough. You know, I really need to know, like, it's good to be intentional. To say like, well, here's how I'd like to use the time. Even if it's to say, I loved this thing that you're doing, and I'd love to know more about that, right? Surely it's not going to be empty talk, right? So I think when you are seeking time from people who are, you know, busy, and, you know, every one of us is busy, but they carry a title and all that. They're human beings. They love to spend time with you, but you got to tell them how exactly you're going to spend their time.
Thanks for that very good advice. We've talked about being a young careerist, and then we've also talked about high-level execs' perspectives. And I myself, I'm a first-time manager now.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. I see in my team what I was like 6 years ago. Scared of networking, scared of going up to our bosses.
Right.
And as middle management, we're always asked to provide more visibility for our staff, help them grow, expose them to our bosses. Do you have any advice on how I can help nudge them out of their shell?
Oh, this is a tough one. Look, I think first giving them the opportunity to do that. So, and giving them time to prep, especially if they are introverts. You know, I have this boss who is amazing at just everything he did was at a very inclusive level. So during the pandemic, for example, he knew all the introverts on the team, and he would make sure everybody had a voice. But for the introverts on the team, he would private message them to say, so for example, he might private message me and say, Uma, I'm going to say this in about 5 minutes. I'd like you to then come in and talk about X. after I finish. So one, I've got 5 minutes heads up to think about what I want to say, right? I think with introverts, like giving them the heads up is so important. So they are not put in a position where I'm going to fail, So I have a heads up, I can prep. So find the opportunity. Maybe it's a special project. Maybe it's a presentation you're going to do where they contributed a piece to it, and that piece they get to present. But you give them plenty of heads up. You sit down with them to prep, make sure they're comfortable. They let them know they can always back out if they want to. So they don't put this pressure on themselves, especially women. We put a lot of pressures on ourselves to be perfect and polished and etc. Give a heads up to your boss that it's going to be the first time, so you'd like them to be nodding their heads, being interested, asking good questions, right? Saying something positive at the end to build confidence for them. So, and this is the role of managers that isn't often spoken about. This is the giving part where you need to groom your team and give so much of your time and resource to help them be successful.
Yeah, I really hear you there. I see so much potential in them. And that relates to my next question as well. Both of them, really hard workers, very detail-oriented. Great to have them on the team. I'm very grateful as well, being a first-time manager to them. How do I convince them that hard work is not all that matters? I think as a young careerist, when I was younger, so I thought, I'll just work hard, I'll get everything done on time, I'll be like the star pupil, and then I'll naturally get ahead. But I mean, as we all learned later in our careers, it's not the case.
Yeah, this is a difficult one. And I think this applies to all levels in careers. I've met very senior people who still believe that I'm going to work really hard and deliver great work, and people are going to notice me and know what I do. Therefore, the promotions, etc., should come to me. And the best quote that I have found on this is from this woman called Sonia Sotomayor, who is, I think she swore in Kamala Harris maybe when she was vice president, but she's, I think, in the Supreme Court. And she says, virtue in obscurity is only rewarded in heaven. So let me break it down. Anything good about you, when hidden, is only going to be rewarded in heaven. And the second part of that quote is to succeed in life, you have to be known to people. And so I try and break that down. This is now the best quote I have found for this situation, because it's so tricky to explain to somebody that you have to make yourself visible, you have to promote your work, that hard work doesn't cut it if you want something more in your career for yourself. Now, if you don't want that, that's perfectly fine, but you cannot sit there and expect awards, promotions, pay rises to come if people don't know your work. It's not the responsibility of senior leadership to know every employee's great work. It has to be promoted, right? And there's little things, you can take them on a journey. For example, start with something small like sending an email once a month that talks about, that they send just to your team, maybe, okay? Just your team, to say, here are the things that I delivered this month that was, contributing this value to your business unit, etc. Right? These are colleagues that already support them, who know them well. Maybe the next month it goes out to another business unit in addition, right? And then, maybe they need to start. Confidence is a muscle. It's like going to the gym.
Would you be able to share how you got to a clearer answer? What are the questions that you asked yourself to get to know your authentic self?
I think there's only one question that really matters in life, which is to answer the question, who am I? And it's a big question. And when my coach first gave me that homework, I was like, really? That's my homework? I'm going to hand it to you next week. And then 3 years later, I still haven't handed it in. In the meantime, I think being vulnerable and just being yourself, even saying like, hey, I'm new to this networking thing. In fact, I'm trying to figure out how to introduce myself. What's worked for you could be an opening line.
Yeah, I could try that line at the next event that I go to.
Yeah. All right. Well, good luck with that, Audrey. Thank you for coming on the show. Now, for every guest and co-host, I ask one question, which is, what's the biggest question that you've asked yourself in order to move forward in life?
It's the same homework that your coach gave you.
Okay.
Who am I? It's a question that I've been struggling with for the past several years. Back to your point on being multi-hyphenated, having different passions and also multiple identities, whether it's in the workplace or outside it. So that's something I'm still working on. A group of girlfriends and we do have this thing I call the quarterly countdown, where we review what happened in the past quarter and then we look forward to the next quarter. And this question often comes up because we will talk about that when we do the review, we'll talk about what's happened at work, but also our health, mental health, and family life and community life. And then this question, I think every one of us in that little group that gathers every quarter is something that always comes up. And we're always questioning, okay, who am I? Who have I been in the past quarter? And who do I want to be in the next quarter? And hopefully that would bring us some clarity soon.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Audrey, for coming on the show. So Steve, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm going to introduce you here, 27 years. As a medical device veteran, you spent 8 years in Asia, the last 8 in Asia. And you're trying to put Asia into Boston Scientific.
Correct.
Tell me more about that.
I have to give you a reason to call me in 6 to 9 months, and so I guess we got to see how this goes, right?
Yeah, we do.
Well, I was also thinking, but when we were started, because I think you're similar to me in that you are an extrovert. Actually, you're an introvert that masquerades as an extrovert.
Yes.
I'm actually the same way. So maybe somebody on LinkedIn can complete the joke. 3 introverts do a podcast. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
But so I'll answer your question. So I've been with a company called Boston Scientific for 27 years now. And I've been here for 8 years, and my CEO wanted somebody to come out to Asia because 27 years ago, for us, Asia was kind of a commercial backwater, right? We had a few hundred salespeople running around. Nobody knew what they did. They sold some stuff, but, nobody was really connected. And he just felt like as a company, we needed to know what was going on in Asia better. So we're getting to be pretty darn big.
That's great. Okay. Now, what was your first job, Steve? Do you remember? After you graduated?
When I graduated, so I joined the military. So I was an Air Force officer, and this sounds a lot more interesting than it is, but I was a nuclear weapons commander.
Wow.
So I had 961 nuclear warheads under my command, and that was my job, and this little red phone connected to this 4-star general somewhere in Omaha, Nebraska that would call me daily to basically yell at me.
Wow. So when you joined this very high-stakes environment, you've had to network.
Yeah, of course. And I was listening to this whole conversation, and I think, I don't go about it in a normal way. And there are a lot of things you were talking about. So, for example, I think my approach was a bit opposite of yours, Uma. So you sought out the highest level executives, right? You had a goal, you wanted to provide stability for yourself. You wanted to be successful. My thing was, I always just wanted to be deeper with my team. So, I never, like my wife is a natural networker. And what I mean by that is she gets to know more and different people. And she does a fantastic job of it. We were living in Tokyo. I called her the mayor of Tokyo. She would know everybody. That's how I met Jim McCready, is through my wife. And Jim is a person that connected Uma and I. But for me, I was never that type of networker. I just always felt if I could get to know the people better that I'm currently working with today and build a deeper connection, instead of going broad, my strategy was always to go deep. And so to your point earlier about, you have to make sure the people you work with, that you get along, that you create a lot of value with, make sure you stay connected with them. That's my way to stay connected.
Now, you have to interact with hundreds of people,
Yes.
right? Partners, customers, your own employees.
Yes.
So how do you go deep with hundreds of people?
Yeah, you can't do that, right?
Yeah.
So Uma, the hard part for me is, as an American, I've got a team that's from India, China, Japan, Australia. For me, Thai names, are you kidding me? I can't say those.
Yeah.
Like, I'm still working on Korean, Chinese names. Like, I master Japanese names, that's okay.
Yes.
Like, so for me, if I remember a person's name sometime, like I'm patting myself on the back,
Yeah.
right? I can't, because I can't like all,
Yeah.
especially, some of these names, it's really difficult. But often what I might not remember a name, I generally remember the faces, and oftentimes I can remember something about them, and I try to. It's really, really hard to do. But if you could find that point of connection, it really helps. I will sometimes tell them something that I'm doing, or be very personal and open about what I'm doing. And often, you can get people to share that way.
Yeah.
And I try to find common connections that way.
One of the questions Audrey asked as a first-time manager in giving visibility to her team and getting them to understand the importance of being visible. And I was sharing this quote, which I think is the best one I've found so far. What is your way of explaining to someone, maybe someone you're mentoring, out in the organization, who is introverted, really great at what they do, but is hesitant to make themselves visible or promote their work?
So I'll talk about a recent example, but it wasn't somebody that's very junior, but the technique is still the same. So there is, as part of my APAC Inside strategy, I'm trying to put more talent inside of Boston Scientific, more Asian talent. And so, I can't do it with everybody, but I pick and choose, and I'm like, hey, there are certain people that I think are at that level, and ready for that next move, right? The timing is right, they're right, everything's right. And so I do kind of like a teaser campaign. So, if I am presenting to EC, or I'm talking to my CEO, or I was talking to the board a couple nights ago, hey, so-and-so on my team was working on it and they told me this. So-and-so on my team, did an analysis on that and here's what they found. So I would start using their name to my boss, the CEO. Like I would start putting their name out there, and I would make it easier for me to get their name up on talent reviews. I would make it easier for me maybe to nominate them for specific training. And then every once in a while, someone asks, I'd really like to meet so-and-so, right? And so I try to help create a little bit of demand that takes off the pressure.
Yeah.
And then sometimes, and I also think a lot of senior people are good with this, is I bring uninvited guests. The other night to the board, I brought an uninvited guest. And my CEO and the board didn't expect that person to be there, but I thought it would be great for that person to be there. And I knew my CEO he's a pretty flexible guy and he's just going to roll with it. And that was okay. And it was great for the person that I brought.
What have you found with Asian talent specifically in speaking up, making themselves visible, being comfortable to promote their work?
Yeah.
Because
it's hard not to be stereotypical on this, right? So I would say that everybody's an individual. So I don't want to be stereotypical. So what I would say is what I'm trying to do. I think, when you think about distances and language and culture and geography, Often the people on this side of the planet have never worked on that side of the planet and vice versa. So one of our values of the company is global collaboration. And I think one of the ways that we create unexpected value is by getting two all-star performers together to collaborate that maybe never wouldn't have done it before. That works really well. But sometimes you could get an all-star on that side of the ocean, all-star on this side of the ocean, and they just butt heads, and 1 + 1 is like -1. And sometimes, you can get, two people that have developed a relationship and trust, and amazing things happen.
And speaking of that, especially in international and MNCs, where I call it male advantaging terms, when it comes to leadership. It's people who are outspoken, who are
Yes.
aggressive, who are go-getters. So when you're interacting with a global audience, and again, I'm generalizing here, but certainly I was one of those Asians who was the quiet, didn't speak up, soft-spoken, said a lot of maybes in my sentence, couldn't get to the point, right? Then I would come across as, there's this confidence equals competent equation.
Yeah.
And it's so hard
Yeah.
here in Asia, right? So how do you help raise the visibility of Asian talent, considering today we still operate in an environment where,
I feel lucky because CEO of Boston Scientific has basically said we have to be more global. And that has given me an ability to start introducing more talent into the organization. And I can often find willing collaborators at my level that are willing to advocate for talent. And there are sometimes people that I don't describe as the assertive, typical type A American sales personality that I think are better listeners, that are more reflective, more thoughtful, maybe more strategic. And so I just position them differently. And it's hard sometimes because you're right. And I think especially, Western executives sometimes have a prototype that's, in their brain, and dislodging that takes a little bit of work. But over time, when they see those people of a very different profile doing some amazing things, it changes, and it changes pretty quickly. And because I also think, most senior executives are pretty smart. They know intuitively that there's not one right way of doing it. They might be attracted to that person.
Yeah.
When they walk into the networking event, that's who they want to talk to. They're going to have fun talking to them over a beer. But they also know that's not the only person that's adding value to their company.
Yeah. Okay, so shall we see if there's any questions for Steve and myself? And while we do that, Steve, I'm going to ask you the question that I ask every guest and co-host, is what's the question that you've asked yourself in order to move forward in life? What's the biggest question, most important question you've asked yourself?
So I'm lucky I got a chance to cheat because I got to hear the question beforehand. But I'll be honest, my first reaction when I heard your question is, again, I'm a father and I've got a daughter. And she's 20 years old. She's a university student in the US. And for those of you that have had difficult teenage daughters, you know what I'm talking about, right? I said between the ages of 13 and 16, I wanted to lock her in a closet sometimes. And there was one day I remember, and I forget what she did. It was totally forgettable, is the point. And I yelled at her. And I remember thinking afterwards, I yelled at her in a way that I wasn't proud. And I'm just like, that's not what I aspire to be as a father. I remember, I don't know how it happened, but it wasn't long after that. J.R. Rudinger wrote this famous poem about it's like an apology to his child. And it resonated with me because in the poem talks about how, he was 30 years older than the child the day they were born, and 30 years older ever since, and trying to give them all the knowledge that they've gained in that 30 years. And so the question I ask myself is wow, how can I be a better father? And so I made a couple of resolutions. One, I decided I'm never going to yell at her ever again. and boy, has she tested me. I tell you what, like, boy, I can be hot-headed, and I have to keep that promise, and I have to remind myself. It's like I want to tattoo it on my hand so I can't forget, right? Boy, like, she could test me, but I have to remind myself, like, if there's one person in my life that I have to have a relationship with that I love, it's my daughter, and she's always going to be there, and so I think if you asked her, she would say, I'm doing a good job of that. Second thing I promised myself, and this kind of is applicable to networking, because I think we all get caught up in this, checking our phone, doing email, sitting in the corner looking at your iPhone when you should be talking to people. When she was younger, she would come up to me and, hey, Dad, I've got a question. Let me finish this email. Let me finish this call. Give me 2 minutes. And again, for those of you that are teenage daughter, if you do that, you go back 2 minutes later. What's up, honey? Nothing. It's over, right? You missed the moment. So the second promise I made myself, when she calls, I answer. And the funny thing is, one of the best moments, and some people have heard this story before, my CEO was interviewing me on a global town hall, video town hall. I remember I was in Brisbane. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning, right? I was really tired. And of course, high school teenagers, they don't sleep, right? So 1 o'clock in the morning is nothing for my daughter. And they were just introducing me. And I don't know how many thousands of people are on the call. And it's a couple thousand, 3,000 people. Yeah. And it was my boss that was going to be interviewing me. And he said, just as they start to introduce me, my screen went black. And it was because my daughter called. She's in Japan. I'm in Australia. She calls. My promise is I'm going to answer. I flipped over on Teams or Zoom, whatever I was on. I answered the call. I said, what's up, honey? And she had something that was not really all that important. I said, well, hey, I got a couple thousand people in the line. Can I kind of flip back over? And she's like, yeah, call me back. And I said, okay. And I flipped back over, and my boss was like, hey, where'd you go? I said, oh, well, my daughter called, and she had to rant about something at me. And I promised that if she calls, I would answer. And the fan mail I got afterwards, because you could imagine, most people would think, a member of the executive committee for a Fortune 500 company would never put their child or anybody like that before they think of you like as so driven on, you got to do the work. And, but no, the most important thing in your life is sometimes, not in the office. It's, it's the little girl at home, and I've got to be a father. And so those are the two promises I've made to myself, and I think I've done a pretty good job keeping them so far.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. All right. So let's see if we got any questions. Yes, we do.
How do I evaluate the current quality of my network?
Steve, do you want to take this one?
Oh.
Okay, let's think about it together. I think the more diverse your network is, the stronger it is. My definition of diverse is, so for example, I spent all my life in tech. And so do I have a network that's outside of tech? My industry was male dominated. Do I have women in my network? All of my roles were Asia Pacific and Japan. Do I have a network outside Asia Pacific and Japan? So that's how I would think about the strength of my network. How would you think about it, Steve?
So the first thing that popped into my mind is, does it fit with what you're doing? Interestingly, in my role, one of the reasons why I'm here is because I've been with the company for 27 years, and I know people around the organization. So if Asia needs something, I tend to know who to pick up the phone and call, who to send an email to, who to drag in, and I can help move things along, get things done. I can advocate. But I remember when I moved to Japan to lead a business in Japan for the first time, I had known a few people because I had traveled there. But then I'm like, I don't know anybody, right? I didn't know any of the customers. I didn't know a lot of part of the team. Like, I had to start all over again. And it was in Japanese. And so I just looked at my network then, and it wasn't purpose-built for what I needed. And now in this current role, there are a lot more people that I have to do that with in order to be successful to make those connections.
Good answers.
Great question.
Yeah, really great question. Okay, the next one is, How should I approach networking in a virtual environment?
Okay, so can I be honest here?
Yeah.
So I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on Twitter. I am on LinkedIn. And we recently had a little session in Boston Scientific about generational communication. And I thought what was fun, they named all the generations after music groups.
Okay.
And one of the things that came up was how do you communicate with how do you communicate, with people? Obviously, your network. And one of my favorite forms of communication is picking up, dialing the phone, and calling people. And most people are like, oh. Like, even if my best friend calls me, I don't answer. I just skip over it and text them back, what's up?
Yes.
And the funniest part about it is our chief medical officer, who's older than me, we were talking about this. I'm like, yeah, Ken, like if I want to talk to you, I just pick up the phone and call you. He's like, yeah, Steve, we should talk about that. So I figured out, like, maybe I'm the only one.
Yeah. No. Who picks up the phone and calls us anymore?
But again, I'm one of those people, like, I'm about deep network rather than broad network. So that is more likely the way that I think about it, right? My wife is, for me to get her off of WhatsApp, during dinner sometimes, like, she's worse than my daughter.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess it depends on the virtual environment you are in. So let's say you have virtual teams, you're working with people all around the world and you never get to meet them. Then I would say it's really about asking for that 15 minutes one-on-one over Zoom. If there are people you're trying to network virtually, that is on LinkedIn, that's the number one professional platform to meet other professionals. So then sending them a message and then it's almost like a customer journey, right? So, how you priming them and then you want to be intentional about it. But I think it goes back to what Steve says. At the end, you want to try and get a call. Do we have any more questions?
Thank you so much for the engaging evening. A few minutes back, a while back, we touched up on the importance of not just making a new connection, but rather constantly engaging them so they're still part of your network. And when you don't do it, only to reach out to them 3-4 years later and you go, hey, hi, how are you? Can you do this favor for me? And of course, you're deprioritized very validly. But what is one thing that would make a difference in that scenario where you've lost the connection, but you do need help from someone?
Want me to go first? Because you want to buy time for this answer?
No, I'll give you a little time to think on this. So I'll take this question. There are people that I have reached out to that I haven't talked to in a long time. But I think if you don't try to like brush it under the rug that you haven't talked in 10 years, all I think you could do at that point is just be honest.
So I think being honest is super critical. Yeah. So if you are there to ask something from this person, go on the offense, pay a compliment because clearly this person added value to you and you appreciate them. And then say why you're reaching out to them in the first place.
Yeah, I think if you had a genuine connection with them, they'll actually love to connect with you again.
Yeah. So great conversation today. We are going to wrap up now. And for those of you online who've stayed all the way, thank you so much. So if you're hearing this message, you've listened to a new episode all the way to the end. And for that, I thank you for the generosity of your time. To wrap up some great points today from our episode. We talked about showing up authentically, meeting others where they are, how to network when you are hesitant to do it, making yourself visible in the workplace and why that's important. So I'm curious to know what else did you take away from this conversation? Love to know what you think. So please follow, like, and leave a comment. Promise to read all of them. And if you enjoyed this episode, share it with your friends. And if you'd like to be a guest on the show, check out the link to send in your details. See you soon.